So, girls, it's been a while since we filmed.
It has been a couple weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah? How is your... Oh, God.
No, I don't talk about how it's been.
How is your love life? So today's episode is going to be in relation to something that touches all of us millennials, and more specifically, the fact that we're very disconnected in an otherwise very connected world. So a study suggests that people aged 16 to 24 are amongst the loneliest out of every other age group, which I find extremely shocking and frustrating, because surely you would expect someone who's in the late 60s or something to feel less connected, seeing as they have less access to social media platforms and all of those tools that we use in the regular. Isn't that really sad?
It's super sad. The way they put it as well. I think it says 22% of millennials say they have no friends.
This is shocking.
Yeah, I luckily I can't relate to that because I can't even imagine, like, my colleagues I like,
Yeah.
and I would maybe say some of them are acquaintances. Like, to say I have no acquaintances or no friends is, it's really, really, yeah.
It's depressing, to
Yeah.
be honest. I think people also often forget what it takes to build a good relationship. You know, we need connectivity and we need transformation in our relationships and we need significance. But oftentimes, I think there is a rise of, there's a certain proclivity to cut people off in our lives. I think that oftentimes, if you don't fit the bill 120%, you're out of the game. And this could be with a friend, and this could be with a lover or, you know, a romantic interest. As if relationships are so easy to build, whereas it takes time and it takes sacrifice and it takes understanding and forgiveness. Why are we so quick to cut people off or ghost?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I was going to say ghosting and things like breadcrumbing or something which didn't exist maybe a decade ago, whereas now it's just common.
It's a slang term.
Yeah, it's slang that we use every day.
I mean, maybe it did exist, just a different term.
People were not
But
talking
I think
about
then it was different. You would just literally walk down the street. If you saw them, you would have to turn the other way.
Yeah.
Whereas now there's so many other ways that you can ignore someone because there's so many other ways of communication. And I guess that brings it to the point that when we talk about our generation and why we are lonely, and like you said, the fact we are more connected, it does bring up the subject of social media and its role in loneliness or lack of loneliness. I guess it depends how you view it.
So is social media making it easier to cut people off and ghost, do you think?
Well, I would say before we even get to the cutting off part, I think in general, millennials probably find it a bit harder to meet people in real life because we've ended up in this bracket between the two, between Gen X and Gen Z, where I was actually speaking to your sister about this, and she was telling me that for Gen Z, it would be weird if you were to tell someone that you met someone else at a bar for the first time. It would be a lot more common for you to say that you met them online.
She said that in Saint-Tropez,
Yeah,
I remember.
yeah, she did. And then you have, on the other hand, Gen Xers who would say that meeting someone online is literally a last resort option. And we're kind of like this generational bracket in the middle, which has the duality of both and is confused about where exactly we should belong.
Do you think there's stigma in saying that you have met someone online, be it a friend, be it a romantic interest?
I think there is.
I think there is.
I would definitely say
is.
so. And that's kind of the point. I mean, the generation after us has accepted that technology has allowed us to do it in certain ways, but we still have the element of Gen X because we're in between the two where we have the same stigma attached.
I agree, but I think that generally big social media platforms like Bumble have now installed Bumble BFF and Bumble Biz to network and meet friends. So I think that is a step towards removing, I guess, a stigma from that.
But it doesn't mean that. I think the issue is we might be having all these connections, but are they quality connections?
It
Or is
depends.
it more shallow?
What does shallow mean to you?
Well,
in
is there
today's
depth to
world?
these relationships, or is it more of a number? Because a lot of people say as well that the reason we struggle as a generation in order to create these relationships is because they are created online on maybe a more flimsy platform compared to some of the more traditional methods that like our parents would have had. So like your religion or your church or your political alignment, like obviously we already touched on how our generation don't necessarily feel like they belong to a certain political point of view. And maybe lacking some of that as well has caused us to feel lonely.
I agree that it's become a little harder, but I also think that even if you do meet someone, say online on Bumble BFF because you've just moved to a new city, or Bumble Biz because you want to meet more people from your network, you can still elaborate in that relationship and invest in that and create a strong, solid foundation by I guess bonding with that person. I think it comes down to the individual, irrespective of the means of how you meet people.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I would say that the flimsiness aspect that you mentioned comes from the fact that it's a lot easier to avoid people if you don't want to see them again.
That's true.
Whereas back in the day, you'd be part of the same society, you'd be part of the same friendship circle, and you'd have to see them all the time. Whereas now you'd meet them online and you don't necessarily have that overlap in friendship groups.
I agree. There's a lack of accountability.
Yeah, exactly.
Have we become very selfish? I've been thinking about this, and I think there's a very thin line between being selfish and making sure you're not taken advantage of, / people stepping on you, / giving up on your own ideals, versus being too selfish. And when someone doesn't fit the bill 120%, you just cut them out. Are we a selfish generation?
I don't know. I guess thinking about the different generations, my mum always says to me, you kids, you're all looking for a 10 out of 10, whether it's a friendship or a relationship.
Yeah.
What happened to just accepting people who are a 7 out of a 10? Or
yeah,
she does think, as an older generation, that we are too picky, and maybe that comes down to the optionality, or the optionality we think we have, we can swipe on an app to meet another person.
Yeah, that is what it is.
Yeah.
I think it's the fact that people give up on other people because, say, they can't find the 100%. They have someone that's 70%, say, and they leave to find that 30%, but they forget that in the process, they've given up that 70. So actually, they're looking for 100% again, all over. I don't think there's anyone worth 100%. I think it stems also from the fact that as millennials, oftentimes we're being blamed for not putting the work in and being too idealistic, and the world is our oyster. We have more startups and businesses being started than ever before. So we're very ambitious. We think that anything is possible, and I think we bring this attitude home with us in our personal life, in that, oh, this is not working for you, then goodbye. And in that we maybe lack the commitment that, say, your mom had, Jess, back in the day.
Yeah.
With making it work with your dad, etc. So I think there is this general attitude that we have where we don't accept anything less than what we think is 100% or what we deserve.
Or what we see online.
That's
the thing. I think people, that's bringing back the social media aspect, but maybe you compare to relationships or friendships or people living different lives online, and it doesn't match up to that. Okay, well, I want that, so,
But it's so easy to glamorize a relationship or a friendship on social media. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the actual face-to-face interaction. And that leads me to my next question, which is, how have we become less comfortable with face-to-face interaction as opposed to online?
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the biggest problems, that when it comes to that particular aspect of being lonely, because if you are used to always interacting with people on a computer, it's very then difficult to make that transition into real life. And I would say, again, the reason our generation is so affected by it is when you compare it to, again, Gen Z, they're born with a phone at the end of their hand. They've accepted that the phone is an extension of themselves. Whereas our generation wasn't necessarily born with the internet. It's something that happened after, and we were still growing, and it kind of shaped us as we were shaping it. And we haven't quite understood what an effect that has had on us and our generation. And that's something that we're so transitional on that we might find it difficult to accept that we weren't born cyborgs, but we ended up becoming cyborgs by the end of it.
So I read an interesting article online, and there was a quote that kind of stood out to me, and I want to know what your thoughts were on it. So it was by a writer called Julie Beck, and she said, social media makes it possible to maintain more friendships, perhaps more shallow friendships, but it also keeps some relationships on life support that would and maybe should have otherwise died out.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I guess what I get from that is that it makes it easier to maintain certain friendships. For example, say if your best friend lives in the States and you live in London, or they live in Brazil or wherever. But at the same time, I guess it becomes a little harder to, say, completely block someone so they can still have access to your life, even crumbs of your life, by seeing your posts or your stories or liking something. And I guess that gives you the impression that, oh, we're still friends. That person's still in my life. They like my photo just now. They know what I'm up to. Yeah. So it's interesting. But I think that it does affect our relationship 100%. I think that it helps my friendships.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't see it as a bad thing at all. I'm not saying that my friendships or my relationships are solely based on social media, because it would be pretty worrying if they did, obviously. But it does help to have this extra platform where you send information, you chat about stuff, you joke. So I don't see it necessarily as a bad thing.
We all have that person who we've only met twice and who is on our social media.
And it kind of also, if you have all these people on your network and you're seeing what they're doing, but you may not be that close to them, I think that can also bring back to the aspect of loneliness, because you get that whole like fear of missing out, or FOMO as we call it, as well.
That's a good point.
I agree with that. So I ran a poll on Instagram the other day, and I quoted the New York Times that stated that millennials lack the ability to create intimate relationships. And I received such a mixed review, and it was interesting because the dividing factor between the responses, the positive versus negative responses that I received, depended upon whether the people were in a relationship. So all my friends that were in a relationship said absolutely false. What I do have with my boyfriend or girlfriend or partner is intimate. Whereas the people that were alone and single said, I agree. We lack the ability to develop intimate relationships. Do you think that sometimes we're using the fact that the generations have changed as a means of maybe justifying the fact that we haven't found the person that we're meant to share this intimate relationship with? What do you think? Do you think we have the ability to be intimate, to develop intimate, real, raw, non-shallow relationships with each other, or are we completely doomed with social media?
No, I think it's fine. You just need to. It always depends on each person. And as long as you have an open mind and you're not focusing on one thing, I think it is possible. I think there's more distractions and probably maybe more hazards out there now than maybe there was for older generations.
100%.
But I think as much as the technology we face, for example, might cause optionality or issues, there's a lot of benefits as well. So I think every generation probably had their other issues.
There are challenges.
Yeah. And for us, maybe it is the technology and how we are more connected. But I don't think it's impossible. I think the fact that people are discussing it probably is going to bring light to maybe those issues.
Exactly.
And it will be okay. And for the generations below us that are really glued to their phones, we'll see.
I think ultimately it's a choice.
Yeah, and they're managing to connect in a different way. They're just using their phones to do it, and they're then transitioning into
Is that because they accept it? They're just like, this is how it's done. Whereas we're a bit like, ooh.
Yeah, we're so like, we haven't identified our identity as a generation. We're stuck between the two, and that's why you have both extremes of people who live on social media and the other side of people who completely frown upon people who share their lives online.
Every millennial that I meet either enthusiastically identifies as a millennial, or albeit them falling within the millennial bracket, says I am definitely not a millennial.
Yeah.
And that person's in their early 30s, 31 or 32. They definitely fall under the millennial definition. They say, I don't identify. I'm the spectrum that doesn't use the internet. I'm the spectrum that knows how to build relationship. I'm the spectrum that, so I think ultimately it's a choice. If you want to develop strong relationships with someone, I don't think social media is going to hinder you. If you have this depth and this intensity as a human, maybe it can be a distraction, as Jess said, for the most fickle of us. But I think at the end of the day, it really does come down to the foundation that you build with the other person. And you can use social media to build that, to increase in that connectivity and that everyday communication.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, superficial people will exist, and we won't necessarily frown upon them.
Exactly. At all generations.
Yeah, in all generations, and it always has.
Yeah, of course.
You just hope that the right people find each other, and if two superficial people find each other,
then
it's great for them. Yeah, I mean, they'll probably be happy because they want the same things out of life, and that's really what you're looking for at the end of the day. That is what allows you to connect, really.
That is true. Moving forward, let's finish on a positive note. I think when I look, for example, at my relationships on a personal level, it takes a lot of time, and it takes commitment to build them, be it a friendship, be it something different. And I think that when it comes to all of our relationships, we need to look at the people that value us and the people that we value back. And it's almost like a plant. Like, you need to water it and you need to help it grow. You can't just let it be there, and by the sake of it being there, it exists. Like, it needs to bloom, right? I mean, we've known each other for so long, and we've put a lot of work in this friendship, and I've done the same with all my friends. I'm sure you too. But there are certain little tricks in knowing how to love each other the best way. Do you want to tell us about it?
What about our next topic?
Yes. About our next topic.
Okay, so next week we are going to discuss the 5 love languages, which is from a book that was published in 1992, but by Gary Chapman, but it's become very popular actually recently on social media. So a lot of you might have heard about it before. And basically, he breaks down the ways in which we like to have love, but also to receive love.
It's very interesting.
To 5 different topics, I guess, or subjects.
I had heard of this years ago, and I had forgotten about it, and then Jess brought it up, and I guessed my top 2. Do you remember how I said it before I even took the test? But it's
coming back in fashion, I guess, to talk about.
I took mine 2 years ago, and I'm going to take one recently for the next episode, and I'm going to compare the difference between the 2.
That's very interesting to see how you've grown.
Yeah.
I think next week we could maybe talk about the psychological tricks to receiving and giving love, and I think there's a lot of, there's Enneagram types as well. And there's various personality tests, and I would like to delve into that.
Definitely tune into next week's episode. I feel like the 5 love languages framework also gives you a good idea of how to connect with people and to understand them a bit better.
I agree, and
100%.
It's not just for romantic relationships, definitely relationships across the board.
And I think it's really important because sometimes the person sitting opposite you wants to receive love in a different manner. It's the same thing where they tell you, the way that, for example, if your mom shouts at you or screams at you, that's the way they show love, and you don't understand this.
Is that love?
Let's not exhaust next week's
let's save it for next week.
Okay, fine.
If you're enjoying our content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
See you next time.
Bye.
It's that new age, it's that new age.